Sabrina Baeta. Welcome to the Bookaholic Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, today we are having a follow up of PEN America's groundbreaking stats that they produced for the 2023-2024 school year and how book bans are affecting children in our schools. Welcome. I wish you could be here on a better occasion, not book bans, but something else more about talking about the progression of books and the acceptance of books. But this is important and we need to dive in. So, fortunately for me, I had a PEN America guest on late in 2024 who gave us the overview of what was going on with book bans in our school systems, and now your full report is ready. So tell us, Sabrina, about the report and how you all brought the report together. What did you do how did you come up with the statistics? How did you get all of the important key parts of the statistics?
Yeah, that's a great question and one we had to ask ourselves because we've been doing this reporting since fall 2021. So this will be the third school year now in 2023, 2024 that we've been doing this kind of reporting. And a key element of our reporting is the content analysis. That means what's in the books. We're looking
Oh,
at what themes, what topics are most banned in these books that are removed from public schools. And we had a report come out in the fall of last year, which is when our reports normally come out. But because of the overwhelming number of books, we actually couldn't conduct content analysis on all of them. So if you look at that report for the first time, it's just the top, I think, 1,093 books that had two or more bans that were reported on. And it was just from the sheer number of unique titles banned, because what we found is there were over 4,000 books that we needed to review. So we went back, I know. And so even after, it was really just a practical, logistical issue for being able to put this out in a timely fashion. We took the
mhm.
time, though. We went back. We looked at all 4,000, over 4,000 of those titles, and have now come out with a new report that gives insights into the content of all of those unique titles.
Wow. Wow. It's so much here that you all have dissected for us. Let's dive in. I can't remember what you mentioned, but let's dive into these intended grades, intended grade levels of banned titles. And I had someone on my show. This was maybe a couple of years ago. And we were talking about, oh, yes, I remember now. We were talking about banned books. This person was not from Pan America, but she said something that was really insightful. There are specific grade points and age points that they like to ban books because that is when the person is becoming themselves, a certain age groups. So I'm a review here. So says 32% adult, 53% young adult. And so not only young adult, but the middle grade, and that's always a really important part because that's when a person is before they hit their teen years, this area is one of sometimes some of the hardest hit. Your report doesn't show that, but I remember interviewing someone else who was talking about different time periods of a person's life is when the attack comes on certain books in the school libraries for these book bans. Would you agree with that? Or how does that thought coincide with your report?
No, it really does coincide with the reasoning behind the book bans. And for us, we're specifically looking at public school book bans, K
Mhm.
through 12 public school book bans. So if you think about the materials intended, we call it intended grade level, right? Intended for those audiences, those are going to be YA and younger. And you already said YA is over half. If you take in the younger categories,
Right.
it's well over half of the books that are banned. So these books, authors wrote those books with the intention to
Right.
introduce those topics to what, it is geared towards that audience. And you're right that it's also a time when students may be exploring for the first time certain topics. They may be first introduced to them. And that's an important educational experience. It's also an important entertainment experience for them. We talk a lot
Right.
about, of course, the educational value of books in schools, but there's also an entertainment value. There's also a representation value. There's a lot of different reasons why a book, especially in a library where a student can go and pick out books that are relevant to themselves, that are interesting to them. It's most of these are not even curriculum bans. They are
Right.
in the school library, they're taking away the choice of the student to be able to explore different topics.
I thank God that I guess I was a kid, but I guess at the time there was not so much talk about book bans when my librarian took me to Judy Blume's Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. And Judy Blume often talks about her books have been on book bans before. And I'm so glad I got to read that book in peace and didn't have to put a cover on it over it or anything like that to hide. I'm just so glad because that book is an instrumental part of my life. I put that on one of my life changing books in my About Me section of my website. That helped formulate who I was, who I am till today. So these books are very important to one's growth, if nothing else.
Exactly. And you brought up honestly such a good element, which is the what these bans do that is so detrimental to students is it creates shame around this that you have
Yes,
to even if they're going to access it, which is an accessibility issue, not all students can go to their, have the means to find a way to their public library if their public library doesn't have banned books also because
right,
that's also up for contention right now. They don't have the means to be able to go purchase books on their own. But even if for some reason they managed to do that, if they felt like they had to cover it, and
right,
especially they're making clear what topics they are banning. We know which types of books seem to be the ones that are pooled. These are books that predominantly feature characters or people of color, are about race and racism, are about the LGBTQ plus community. So these are identities they're attacking, but they're also experiences. They're sexual experiences between characters. Many of these, it's funny, for all the sexual experiences between characters, that being like, oh, the sex in books, that's the problem. So many times it's about a woman's journey being able to find
right,
herself, being able
right,
to empower herself.
right.
Also, like, victims of sexual abuse, it's their stories and how they came through that. Those are the books that are being banned. And
Yes,
when you entertain the idea that a material can be challenged based on that content, even if it ends up back on shelves, you send a clear message to your community that we need to reconsider that. That is up for the existence of that content and the availability of it is up for debate when it shouldn't be.
absolutely. You have here in your report topics and themes and band titles with graphic or illustrated content. It's 60% deal with characters of color. 39% have LGBTQ plus themes, 30% violence or gore, 18% sexual or sex related, 17% non sexual nudity, informational or artistic, and 11% political social movement messaging. And 90, no, 60, no, 99% is no, I shouldn't add them because that's not how this chart is working, but 60% belonging to race and racism and 39% belongs to LGBTQ plus Y. Why are those two major themes that bother so many people?
Yeah, and you brought up a great point in the visuals in books. And I'm going to butcher the quote right now, but the author of Mouse, Art Spiegelman, has a wonderful quote about how seeing an image goes straight to your brain. There's an aspect of it that you look at it and you can take in the full context and then you dive into the different smaller elements of it. It's also been an important element of kids reading and being able to get reluctant readers to read more, to be able to offer different modes of accessibility to understanding a story. So visual books like graphic novels have been on the rise lately. So why are they getting attacked? Books lately have incorporated more representative content, more diverse stories. So that's almost a feeding ground that you can ban more of if those are the topics that you're banning. It's
Right.
also for a book banner, it's been an easy target because they are all about taking out of context passages. And they do that with books as well, reading out certain passages in school board meetings and such, but it is harder. You have to, like, it doesn't look very fancy to put a wall of text on a poster, but if you take an out of context like comic strip, if you take a page out of context, that to them, the same way it works to help readers, it almost helps those just looking at the image, and it creates this kind of fake, what I call a manufactured moral panic.
Yeah.
We're always encouraging people to turn the page, to not view that out of context because pretty much anything taken out of context is going to be influenced then by the context that is around it. So if the context
Right.
around it is book banners holding up a sign saying this is inappropriate, then that is now the new context that is establishing what that one panel is about.
Right.
And that is
Right.
not the correct context. It was not
Right.
written to be held up by a book banner. It was written to be read in a full book, to be seen the panels around it, to see the pictures around
Absolutely.
it. Well,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
for the content that even you look at and you think, "Oh, you have that moment," I encourage people, go to the original work. But something else you brought up was non-sexual nudity, and you may be, "What are you talking about?" We're talking about picture books with goblin butts in them. We're talking
Oh,
about art p and yep, we're talking about, like, art, like, the date like, that is what we're talking about that they're banning. So this is a complete overreach, moral overreach, saying, "I think kids are aware they have butts." Like, I don't think that's something we need
absolutely.
policing.
Absolutely not. So, not why do you think this is this a moral overreach when certainly we see we don't really see morality that much? Why do you think this is something that people are interested in and there's the uptick of this? Why do you think that? Why does Pen America think that?
So we've been able to trace it started with groups on the ground coordinating, and I call them groups on the ground, but that sounds grassroots groups. And I always say it was not that the parents of the United States woke up one day and suddenly all collectively thought, I need to go into my school library and look in the books. That's not what happened. They were
Right.
coordinated on a national level, and they are driven by Christian nationalist principles. And that is why it feels so ideologically driven. But the problem is that is implementing one moral lens that everybody has to abide to. And if I think you could pick any two people in the world, any two students, any two families, and their morals will not perfectly align. That
No.
is not the point of public education. That is not the point of a pluralistic society. And that certainly isn't the point of the United States and state governments. But
Right.
more and more we saw these groups influence state governments into pushing their ideological agenda and dictating what can be available and what's not, and taking that power away from teachers and librarians who learn, who are taught, who go through schooling, extensive schooling on how to pick materials that are appropriate, but also are educational, that also show a lot of different viewpoints that are preparing students for the pluralistic society that they're a part of. Because the point of public education is not to be able to just present one viewpoint and say this is the truth. It's actually the opposite. It's to present many, to say this is how, this is how you gather facts, this is how you form opinion. Your opinions can be different, but this is how you can articulate them. It's actually about critically engaging with materials and encouraging those discussions instead of completely shutting down any viewpoint that isn't one determined by this vocal minority of people shouting, and now larger state governments who have fallen into line according to this one very narrow ideological belief.
Wow, wow. And are there any particular groups named? Do they have a name that, is there one main group that has been unified that can be identified?
So the Moms for Liberty is probably the biggest one that people have heard about.
Yes.
Yeah, they have a
Yes.
wide agenda. They started as an anti-mask group. And then once that started getting lifted, they were like, okay, what's next? And they turned to book banning. But we see a
Uh-huh.
lot of different groups. One of the co founders, Tiffany Justice, is now doing a lot with the federal government. So we can see what
Yes.
direction this is all heading in. But another one is Citizens Defending Freedom. There's a lot of different state level groups as well. But we actually put out a report, I think almost maybe 2 years ago or something like that, finding
Mhm.
these groups and naming some of the major groups. So I encourage people to look, but I encourage people to also look. It's so funny because it's almost like the names they have are so like Moms for Liberty. Yeah, oh, let's be moms and let's be for liberty. But to dive deeper into the principles, and our side is susceptible to the same thing. Everything is like a let read or defending read or right to read. And to make sure to dive into, I would say, I think ours are a little better, but I would say dive into the principles of the group, especially if you start to see things at your own local level and be like, huh, why is this group that claims liberty actually
Right.
limiting free speech and expression? Like, question that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. The Moms for Liberty, they are, if you go to the US, may not exist today, I'm not sure, but the Department of Education, the last week or the week before, they were talking about the DEI portal. They were behind that. So they're a here at Bookaholic, that is a negative group. So I'm just going to make that statement right now. We're not for that type of thing here. So yes, I definitely wanted these groups identified because we've got to fight back. So can America tell us how those of us who love reading, love learning, and want people to not be ashamed of who they are, to be seen in books and identify themselves in books. What can we do about it? Is there outside of Pen America? We know Pen America, but outside of Pen America, are there other groups fighting back these groups like Moms for Liberty? What can we do about it?
Oh my God. So there's so much you can do about it. And I'm so excited that all this.
Ready.
And the first step is actually what anyone is doing right now, which is getting aware of the issue. We can't fight what we don't know.
Right.
Listening in, reading up more. Penn America is doing what I hope is great research and public awareness building, but also National Coalition Against Censorship is also doing this. Every library, other organizations are also doing this. American Library Association. Go and see those materials and read up on the issues. There's lots of also great local reporters who are reporting out on this. And I would say this is a huge national problem and that can seem very overwhelming. But the
Yeah.
best thing is to get local. Find out what's happening in your own school district. Find out what's happening in your own county. A lot of this
Okay.
is also affecting public libraries. So if you're someone who's maybe better suited to have influence over the public library space, go and do that. And that can look like anything from searching for local grassroots groups around you. And I will say, if you're to an estate that you think might be a hotbed for censorship, there's probably a group. Florida Freedom to Read Project in Florida is great. Let Utah Read is great. If you're wondering what you can do locally, every library has a great, it's called Fight for the First. If you Google that, it has a great initiative that tells you what's going around or going on around the country that you can support. But really, you're going to make the biggest influence in your own neighborhood with your own neighbors. So that can look like I always tell people to have their own brand of advocacy because not all of us are suited to go and do a public speaking segment at the local school board meeting. If you hate public speaking, that is not for you. That is fine. Bake cupcakes, bring them to your librarians and say, "Hey, things seem hard. Are y'all facing these same challenges? Do you need me to do something? Because we can be proactive in this fight. If love that Black History display, tell them. Write it down
Right.
for them. So when they get a complaint about it being something stupid, GI, woke, whatever excuses
Right.
that they try
Right.
to use to hide their racism, the book banners use to
Yeah.
hide their racism, then they have 5 notes already from people saying, wow, thank you so much for having this Black History Month display, for having the Pride display, for having
Right.
these books. Check out the books that are banned. and then return them with a note that says, wow, this was life changing for me, or I gained a different perspective than what I could just get from the world around me, because that's what books offer. But we have
Right.
to be vocal about that in a way that we haven't had to be before. We have to be fighting for the freedom to read, not with the assumption that we have it, but with the assumption that it's going to be taken away. So we need to be fighting for it both reactively when we see a case happening in our own neighborhood, but then proactively as well.
Wow. Definitely, let's be proactive. And we're going to have some of the statistics in the podcast show notes, as well as in the description box in the video below. And I probably will have a blog post on my website as well to bring about more information about how you can find these book bans. Sabrina Baeta, thank you so much for joining the Bookaholic Podcast today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.